Hi everyone at home, and hi everyone again, because obviously we've been in the same room for a little while. So I know we don't have a lot of time, and we all been trying to think what we can fit in. But I was debating to myself which approach to take, whether to tell you about one particular project, or do I need to be closer to the microphone? Okay. I move a lot when I talk, so I have a friend used to say, if you tied my hands back, I can't talk. I'll be quiet. Yeah, so I was debating which approach to take, but because we're talking about journeys to net zero, so taking an approach to tell you a bit of the journey we've been taking to look at decarbonization of cities. So I'm from the Department of Architecture and Built Environment at the University of Nottingham. Our exhibit for 2022 is online, so if you have a look at the kind of work that the students do, but it's very much on city and building level, planning and design, but also deputy lead of the University of Nottingham Energy Institute, where that congregates often in energy research that's across the board. So we've just heard a mix of social science and technical backgrounds. So the Energy Institute brings it all together to try to tackle the issues that we face with energy, and particularly the aspect I did more on is on cities. So the link between mobility and cities, the energy systems and the built environment. So that's me and my background. I'll talk a little bit about the work, all the work that is here being involved, but obviously not done just by myself, so bear that with me. And I borrowed this graph from the World Economic Forum just to kind of give some headings to the kind of work we do. Because when we talk about decarbonizing cities, there's so much stuff that could be done. In fact, everything we discussed today, and there's so many different subjects and areas to cover. But very much we work on looking at ultra-efficient buildings and looking at electrification and looking at smart infrastructure. So I made up some words there, but I think you know what I mean. So rationalize, electrify, and smartify. So those are three areas that really summarize the kind of work that we do to decarbonize cities. So I'm going to start by giving you a couple of examples of the work on rationalizing. Based in Nottingham, as you heard. Nottingham was the first city to commit to carbon neutrality, and one of the earliest targets, 2028, which is really kind of tomorrow, isn't it? And the city's taken that approach of being so ambitious because in the previous decade, 2010 to 2020, it achieved all its goals, which wasn't net zero carbon yet, but a significant reduction, 6 years ahead of time. So the city thought, well, we can do this. But of course, a lot of the easy wins have been won, and I go into the difficult wins, and that's where most of us are really across the board, is those little things. So one of the hard wins is the housing stock, so the existing buildings. Nottingham has about 164,000 homes. 61% of those are below an EPC level of C, and I think you're familiar with EPC levels, so the colorful grading. So anything that is not green is bad, and there's a lot of not green. Which, we assume in average that would be, each home would be releasing about 6 tons of carbon, which is the UK average for those properties. We committed as a nation to bring all homes to EPC level C by 2030. And I always smile when I say this because I live in a Victorian house. It's not going to be anywhere near C anytime soon, except the government really wants to fund this with seriousness. But if you're have a privately owned property, is very unlikely going to get access to anything that helps you. So yeah, on that. Anyway, maybe some of you are that too. But let's assume we can get all those houses to be level C and above by 2030, which sounds very crazy. Then perhaps the average tons per home will be about 4.5, bringing us to a total of about 740,000 tons of carbon per year, just from the existing housing stock, just from the houses that are there now, not the houses that are going to be built today and tomorrow and the next year, which are still being built to the previous building regulations, crazy as it sounds, even though the new building regulations are coming up to be implemented by 2025, but which is still not net zero carbon anyway. It's a crazy world, the built environment. But that's equivalent to about 740,000 hot air balloons, or about 74,000 hectares of trees, depending on what kind of tree you plant, and depending on, also bear in mind, trees take 20 years, and I think you're going to hear from an ecologist later, take about 20 years to start really absorbing carbon. But 74,000 hectares is 10 times the size of the city of Nottingham in area. That's for 1 year, just for the housing stock. There's no chance we can offset stuff. There is a lot of work to be done on rationalizing, which is that first aspect I was talking about. So currently I'm running a project that is a community renewal fund funded. So central government has given some of the local authorities in the country money to run particular projects that are beneficial to them. The one I've got is one of 4 in Nottingham, and is looking at a carbon cost retrofit roadmap. And by that I mean we're looking at retrofit strategies, the cost of each of those strategies, the feasibility of those strategies, and the payback both in financial terms, but also in carbon terms. So look at the embodied carbon of the retrofit strategies. So rather complex task. And just to give you a flavor to what that means, if you get a house that's built, then we start through the easiest things that typically we do: lock installation, floor installation, possibly together if you have, because normally you get the same contractor. Then start thinking about wall installation and windows. When you then go around to draft proofing and making that tight before you can start thinking about renewables, SLC pumps, PVs, and so on. So that's the kind of thinking. That's a flavor how the outcomes look like. So if you can see, the houses are being separated by age and by fabric type. We looked at all the housing stock, and we tried to cover about 80% of them within our studies. And then run a few particular case studies that are significant to Nottingham. Some of the tall towers, they're going to have to be retrofitted and so on. And you can see each of those retrofit strategies in each of those columns. The graph on the top left is homes built prior to 1930s, the 1930s, 1970s, 70 to 80 and 85. And those brackets of time is when those significant changes in building regulations, and therefore the building fabrics are similar within those periods. So you can see you can have actually a significant impact. So if you're doing a deep retrofit, i.e. trying to achieve passive house type of levels, really energy efficient homes, maybe a Victorian home like mine could get 79% now in terms of energy use for annual heating demand, which is the majority of the energy there, while the newest homes are much smaller proportion of the big picture, but it still could make a significant change. However, I spoke about feasibility. So a lot of what we're doing here is looking at what happens in real life. In real life, you would not retrofit 1980s homes. Very likely, maybe you do a little bit of something, but you're not going to make a full investment in energy efficiency in a home that is already fairly new. So typically that doesn't happen. In older homes, some stages don't happen either. For example, retrofitting a Victorian house floors, if it's on, you usually have about a third of the floor that is suspended floor that you can insulate quite easily. The rest is directly into the ground. So that kind of thing doesn't happen either. Or external insulating a home that has cavity wall. So you insulate the cavity, but then extra insulation on the outside. Mostly that's not going to happen. So we're really looking at the feasibility of those, and then looking at the cost of each of those strategies. And even though the government's talking about giving £5,000 per home to make homes more energy efficient, the cost that we have observed so far, and this is based on real life, not assessment, is about £70,000 in average to retrofit a social home, which is a very small property, and typically probably costs about that much to build in the first place. And that's the cost of retrofitting average. For a private home, it's at least 85,000, but there's a lot less data on privately owned properties, with deep retrofit in particular, because I don't know of many. In fact, I know of a couple, but not many in Nottingham either. Then we looked at the benefits from a carbon perspective. So the darker color is using gas for heating up the home, and the lighter color is using an SLC heat pump with a system efficiency of 3.35, so quite a typical unit. And you can see obviously that you have quite a significant amount of carbon that you're saving by using electricity rather than gas, which is what we're looking to do now because we're decarbonizing electricity. So it's an easy thing to tap into. However, when you then look at the cost, and we got into that area of electrification, actually it's going to cost you a lot more to heat up a home with electricity currently. So the graph on the left, if you're not taking gas standing daily charge into account, and on the right if you are. So on the right you're just about the same if you're using electricity, while on the left you're paying a lot more for electricity. And of course, other things that associated pumps tend to be low temperature, so if you have a really inefficient house, you're probably going to be uncomfortable anyway. So this is hopefully going to help inform the government on some of the movements and some of the investment in retrofitting existing buildings and homes in particular, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. The reports that have been commissioned by the government across the country talk about a full deep retrofit for about £15,000, with PVs for about £22,000 per home. If that was the cost, we would have done it. Everyone would have done it. So I got into electrifying heat, which is one of the biggest swings we're going to see in the zero carbon agenda. How many minutes I've got?
7.
Oh, good then. But there's other areas of electrification, of course, that we need to look at. As we decarbonize electricity, we try to move more things onto that bracket. So we've been looking at moving or combining mobility with the built environment and the energy system. So I very much work in that middle ground. And this is one of the projects that are being running that's just finalized in Velocity, which was looking at vehicle to grid or vehicle to building or vehicle to X, so vehicle to anything, charging and discharging. So essentially, this is biodirectional charging. So the thinking is, if you have a building that's producing electricity, generating electricity as the majority will have to do in the near future, why would you purchase a new battery for it if you already have to purchase an electric car? Yeah, that's a battery. That's a big, really big asset. It's probably the most expensive part of your vehicle anyway. And if you can be clever about how to charge and discharge that, you can increase the benefits financially because you can be sending your energy to the grid, but also significantly reduce your carbon emissions. So essentially, this project is about matching up the demand of energy with the availability of charging from electrical vehicles through bidirectional charging. And we installed a few of those across the board. We have 2 at the University of Nottingham. We have a few in Loughborough, in Leeds, and Worcestershire, and Warwick, actually, which was on the partners, which was sort of from Warwick, and some battery work in Warwick. So you can see, actually, this is my office there. So that little house is a passive house, operational zero carbon house that produces quite a lot more electricity than it needs. The electricity can go either to power the homes around it, the neighbors, or to power the car. So we tend to, actually, our car is part of the study, so we drive on sunshine most days, so we just charge on excess renewable, and that's all we use. And that's the thinking. So if you can then program when we park and we plug it in, all they need to know is when I want it to be charged. And then the intelligence behind the system will think, oh, actually, at this moment in time, you're better discharging because there's lots of demand. At this moment in time, you're better charging or you're better storing and waiting to 2 in the morning. And this is a heat map of a university fleet. So then we're looking at when vehicles are being used and when they're available for charging. And you can see different fleets have different use. So the colorful, beautiful graphs on the right, done by one of my researchers, who's amazing at making colorful graphs, as you can see. Whenever you see a red dot, it means all of the vehicles in that fleet are being in use. So just by looking at that, you can see how much you can optimize mobility and think of the way we use our vehicles better. Because some fleets are really difficult to electrify. And that's not just the case at the University of Nottingham, but everywhere. If you have maybe home delivery services, for example, you don't want to interrupt your service in order to be able to charge your vehicle. Or if you have security fleet, you might be running constantly, you might have to be ready anytime to run and reach them out. So this work really told us where we could optimize and where we had opportunities to charge and discharge vehicles. So we combine, and I spoke a little bit about intelligence. There's a lot of intelligence and machine learning behind here, not by me, because I'm not the intelligent one, but by the very clever people we hire. So you combine vehicle availability, and that means the needs of the users with this battery state of charge and where it needs to be. Then with the building the building energy consumption and production, and then you look at carbon emissions, so the carbon intensity of the grid at those particular moments in time. By mixing that all up, then you come up with something like this, that of course the user doesn't need to understand. The user just needs to plug it in. But the machine needs to understand that actually for this period of time, the vehicle is likely to be available for charging or discharging. So is it better to charge at this moment or discharge? And then we ask those questions based on, in this case, for example, environmental benefits. So I want to save the most carbon. Should I charge or discharge, or what time should that happen? Or I should save the most money. And therefore, you just get those answers based on your need. Another similar project, but this time looking at wireless charging devices, so quite new technology, quite a nightmare to get it ready, installed and running. Probably the biggest part of the project was actually to get on the ground. But here is the Rivers of Nottingham, and that's as sexy picture as I could get of this. And this is by professionals as well. It's a hard one to get sexy. But the interesting thing is actually being able to deal with some of the fleet or some of the vehicles that either have difficult inaccessibility or they only have very small periods of time to charge and discharge. For example, when loading and unloading, or taxi ranks that are constantly moving a little bit further. And in the center of this, there's again a lot of machine learning and algorithm development to get all those different variables and put them all together to answer the questions that we need answering. And that brings me to the next little bit, which is where I'm going to finish, which is looking at smartifying. And I appreciate that's not a word in English, but I do think it should be. English is not my first language anyway, so I'm fine with making them up. So by smartifying, I mean understanding, collecting data that allows us to understand what the problems are, what the lack of data maybe we can collect more, be able to install monitoring control systems, and be able to tell people what's best doing. So for example, if you're on campus, to be able to tell, actually, if you walk, you're going to take that much time and you're going to improve your health by that many points. While if you get the public transport, that's how much carbon emissions you're going to release. And if you're cycling or you actually bring your private car. So you have an element of comparison and engaging people in that process. For the ones who have met us before, you've probably seen the Creative Energy Homes. So that's, again, my office in there. This is 8 energy efficient homes on campus that we use as part of our research. So they're occupied by either as offices or homes. And they have all various levels of energy efficiency, and they're connected as a smart grid, as a micro smart grid that has heat and electricity. And that enables us to just test all those different ideas on the ground, on the campus, in an environment that is safe and controllable before we go out into the real world, such as through Project Sensible, where we installed the kind of technology and thinking in community energy. Just heard about community energy a minute ago. In a real life community, engaging real life people with the buildings that are there. Similarly, another European project that led us to develop the vision for the Trent Basin. So again, some of you have actually been in some of the events that we organized through the work on Trent Basin. This was a lot of collaborative planning, working together, planners from the city, developers, investors, university, academics, to try to put a vision down for something which was a completely derelict industrial site, to turn that into a sustainable housing development. And further than that, when we're pushing the boundaries of the developers and saying we must go net zero, for example, they'll come back and say, we can't afford it. It's a difficult site, we're not going to sell these properties, they're getting too expensive. So I say, okay, well, you do the houses as maximum you can go, as good as they can be, and again, try to combine them into a community energy scheme. So if you don't have enough roof in your property, you can benefit from the roof from your neighbor, because everyone's benefiting from the assets together. And that's what Project Scene was. The largest community battery in Europe, a PV farm on the derelict sites, which are now moving on to the buildings as the building being built. And again, a lot of intelligence on thinking how that could be delivered. So we have a digital twin that we can be accessed online, so you can have a look at the energy flows and the building used. We have a physical community hub where people can come together, and there was a lot of actually promoting a community form in an area that actually was no community, just direct buildings, and a lot of intelligence that may be prompting you. So we have altered voice-activated systems to actually tell people your energy use today is a lot higher than last year. This time is something going on that you could do better. We just got a new award for this project, so this slide has lots of awards and government documents where we have made a real impact and generate some real outcomes. But importantly, we got further funding to continue the work there, to then look at the benefit from the user side in terms of the mix of using locally generated energy, or actually providing grid services and then having a payback as a financial benefit. I'm not going to do that on the energy flows, but have a look at how it looks like. And on the left, you can see a profile for a home before the pandemic. And on the right, the profile for home after the pandemic. So one of the great benefits is we have really high level granularity of data. So we can see, the hub is being on and you have a new lunchtime peak that we never had before. So I think thinking about net zero cities and that proposition really has to take into account resilience to things such as the pandemic. It could be something else. It could be a new pandemic, but actually our systems need to think ahead of time and be ready for that. Next stage of this, we are building a bigger digital twin of the whole city. We're building the campus now because we have lots of data, and then transferring that to the rest of the city, where we can start looking at mobility and energy issues to start with before we can move on to other aspects. Thank you.